thank you to everybody who's here in person and online. Thank you for inviting me to give this presentation today and for all the excellent organisation and support as usual. I'm sure a lot of you attended the lecture that was given by Lynn Hendricks, and she was talking about participatory methods for community engaged research in transdisciplinary contexts, and also the lecture that was given by Marina Hubert, and she was talking about the public communication of science. And I'm going to be drawing on a lot of the points that they raised in their lectures, and I'm going to be also building on those. So through the talk today, we're going to be touching on what is co-production. Why do co-production in health research? We'll talk about some strategies to support co-production in health research. I'm going to give a case study example, and I'm going to be giving the case study of the Climate Change and Mental Health project that Astrid just referred to. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the co-production workshop. And I'm hoping for plenty of time for questions and answers and discussion at the end. So before I go any further, can I get some ideas from you about when the term co-production was first coined and advocated? When do you think that was, the term co-production? Any ideas? Any guesses? Any people that know? Roughly? Do you want to know? Do you want to guess?
Probably surprisingly recently.
Okay, surprisingly recently. Anybody else? Yes?
Yes, 2000s, late 1990s, production and choose one of the problems.
Okay, thank you. So, way back in the 1970s, Eleanor Ostrom and her colleagues advocated for the idea of co-production. And they defined it as a process through which inputs used to produce a good or service are contributed by individuals who are not in the same organisation. And so then the theory of co-production, it was originally developed to conceptualise a particular type of relationships between providers of goods or services, such as public officials, and users of those goods or services, such as citizens. So co-production is definitely a buzzword at the moment, but I think it's really important for us to recognise that it's not a new concept and that there is a very extensive literature on co-production, and it dates back many years. And it's a relatively new way of thinking in the health sciences. And there are increasing calls for co-production in health science and health research from funders. And there's definitely at the moment, there is a renewed momentum for co-production and what I'm going to be referring to more generally as co-approaches in health research. So, in 2021, the British Medical Journal published a special issue, and the special issue was on the topic of increasing the impact of health research through the co-production of knowledge. And this pulls together a collection of 15 analysis and opinion pieces on the topic of co-production. And it shares findings from perspectives from South Africa, from Kenya, from Ghana, and from Cambodia. And covers topics such as COVID-19, mental health, and national insurance schemes, as well as health systems strengthening. And the definition that is used by Redman and colleagues who were the editors is where researchers work in partnership with knowledge users to identify a problem and produce knowledge, sharing power and responsibility from the start to the end of research. That sounds wonderful. We'll come back to talking about that a little bit later. So this definition does definitely line up well with the original definition that was coined by Elinor Ostrom way back in the 1970s. Okay, so knowledge users. Who are knowledge users? Well, in health research, knowledge users can be a very large array of people. Of course, it can be patients in the wider public, people who are directly affected by the health challenge that's being explored through research. Health professionals, this could include clinicians, nurses, other caregivers. It could be occupational therapists, it could be counsellors, health systems managers, policymakers, and way more. So it is a very wide array of people who are users in the process of and the purpose of health research. So co-production definitely does include generating knowledge with the wider public and people who are affected or suffering from the health problem, but not only those groups. So, and this is why, co-production is very much part and parcel of transdisciplinary research, and that seeks to address, really complex, real world and often wicked health challenges that need a lot of different inputs to really be able to understand what's going on and what's needed. So at this point, can I just ask in the room, who's doing co-produced research, co-production as part of their research process? And could you maybe just give us like a sentence or two that explains your co-production, what your co-production process looks like? Is there anybody wants to share?
Thanks. So one of my PhD students is developing an intervention to address chronic pain and depressive symptoms in garment workers who are working in clothing factories in Cape Town. And we are working with staff in the factory and people who identify as having chronic pain and depressive symptoms to co-develop an intervention that's going to work in the factory for them.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hello, we work in a local community called Bishop Lavis, and we run a public health and social innovation hub. We work with the community to co-develop solutions to address local issues that they've identified, focusing on non-communicable diseases. And we've used a variety of techniques, but design thinking has been one of them, and drawing from social innovation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Those are excellent examples, brilliant examples. I think we have another one in the front here.
Yeah, firstly, I have to apologize. I didn't know that it was co-production, but now with the introduction slide, I can see that it is co-production. So we have a GBV project in Malawi funded by UN Women. So we are piloting a safe space at a tertiary institution for the GBV survivors on campus, like the students at that university. So the participants are the ones who are involved to come up with this, defining and coming up with a package for this safe space, which we are going to pilot in that. So I think this is co-production, isn't it? Probably. Thanks.
Okay. So I just put this slide in to show that community engagement and involvement and co-production are not one and the same thing. There's a lot of different understandings around what all these different terms mean. And co-production really is at the heart of a lot of different types of ways of working, including community engagement and involvement in research. So yes, I'm going to just explain what these other circles are. So CBPR is community-based participatory research, and that involves co-production, and PAR is participatory action research, which is iterative cycles of research and action and learning. And so co-production is a part of all of these, but it's not synonymous with community engagement and involvement in research. So I just really wanted to make that clear. So working in partnerships with knowledge users from the start to the end of research, gosh, there's a lot of extra work, and it's not at all straightforward, and it takes a long, long time. So why bother doing it? Well, coming back to the literature again, so Grindel and colleagues published an article in BMC Health Services Research in 2022. The use of co-production, co-design, and co-creation to mobilize knowledge in the management of health conditions, a systematic review. And what they did here was they looked at all of these papers. There were 24 articles altogether, and they looked for any papers that used the co-production, co-design, and co-creation as ways of working to do health research. And they looked at what principles the researchers were saying that they were following, what the researchers believed was enabled through co-production, and what their goals and aspirations were, and what they believed that co-production could actually produce. So in terms of principles, bringing people together as active and equal partners, diverse people together, valuing all knowledge, using creative and innovative approaches to understand and solve problems, and then iterative techniques for developing prototypes. So creating practical, tangible objects. And that this would enable shared understanding of the problem, a well-rounded identification of needs and how to meet them, a balance of power and voice, fostering a sense of ownership among the partners, and building trust and confidence in co-produced solutions. And they believed that this knowledge that would be generated would be more widely used. It would be what would be created would be more accessible. It would be more relevant, and it would be more acceptable. And it would produce outputs that are more likely to be implemented in healthcare practice. So the goal of applied health research, the ultimate goal of applied health research is to improve health outcomes and to improve the quality of care. And what we aim for with co-production is to increase the chances of research improving health outcomes, so that whatever is made, whatever the end product is, whatever the intervention is, that it can be applied and accepted and trusted and used, and contribute to positive and measurable impacts on health outcomes. So, okay, so we've covered the what is co-production, who with, and why. So now we're going to move on to the how. Okay, well, there are traditional social science approaches that can be used as methods for co-production, such as focus group discussions or community meetings and community dialogues. And here, researchers will have a discussion with for example, some community members who are experiencing a certain challenge, and then the researchers will go, they will synthesize their findings, and they will create some kind of output from that. Maybe it will be a report, or maybe it will be some guidelines, or maybe it will be a publication, or perhaps it will be some kind of tangible output. But focus group discussions and community meetings, they definitely they hold a very important place in transdisciplinary research, but they are relatively light touch ways of mobilizing and co-producing knowledge for the purposes of research. So then we come on to citizen science, and citizen science really has become, has also become increasingly popular in the past 10, 15 years as a way of doing co-production and research. And it involves non-professionals contributing to various stages of scientific research. They collect data, they submit observations, and they helped, therefore, to frame problems and also help to disseminate results. And this has been reported to increase the spatial and temporal coverage of data, and it is especially useful in environmental monitoring, and also really helps to contribute to scientific literacy, so that the people who are the citizen scientists, the people who go out and collect the data and submit their observations, do become much more knowledgeable about the science that they are working for and contributing to. And this slide just shows, so there's again a vast array of literature out there about citizen science and what it's been used for. And this is just a very tiny list of examples here. So it's been used for monitoring mosquitoes in Spain. It's been used for testing water quality in India. It's been used to assess coastal biodiversity in the Philippines, to track air pollution in Kenya, and to validate the knowledge about seed production in Peru. So it can be used in all sorts of different ways. I think one of the criticisms around citizen science is the quality of the data that's collected, whether very robust processes are being followed, and that requires a huge amount of engagement with the citizen scientists before they go out with their collection devices, in order to make sure that they know how important it is to be rigorous and to be following protocols and to be systematic in the way that data is collected. So, and then there are visual and arts-based research methods. And again, there's a very large number of different types of methods and approaches that can be used in arts-based research. And the list here, we can do art making, body mapping, and the image on the right shows a body mapping process happening just outside Stellenbosch with people from living in an informal settlement called Enkanini. Other forms of mapping include community mapping, there's digital storytelling, hand mapping, participatory theatre and the performing arts, photo elicitation methods, photo voice methods, picture card games, postcard sets. So there's a very large number of ways in which knowledge can be co-produced through using arts-based methods. And some of the advantages then are that so using visual methods can help to transcend barriers of language and literacy. It's a much more creative approach to expression. Co-producing knowledge in this kind of way can be less intimidating, and it can be more enjoyable. It can be fun. It can be play, even when the issues that are being addressed are really hard and sensitive issues to talk about. So it allows a more in-depth exploration of lived experience, where affected community members can really share their lived experiences. So one of the things that Marina talked about in her lecture on the public communication of science was really about the emotional connection and what makes people change their behaviour, what makes policymakers listen. Is to have an emotional connection with the subject matter that they're addressing, be they a researcher or a policymaker. And I think that one of the things that visual methods does is it enables that emotional connection to be forged, so that you can really get a much better understanding of what a lived experience is. Of course, there are tremendous ethical implications with doing participatory visual research, asking people to illustrate and talk about their lived experiences of major health challenges that they're facing, either personally or within their families or communities. And so the ethics of visual methods is a really big consideration, and also a very big literature on that is available. Okay. So I just wanted to bring at this point your attention to this guidebook, this handbook, The Practice and Ethics of Participatory Visual Methods for Community Engagement in Public Health and Health Science. And this is available, it's available free and open access on the Global Health Network. And I put this together a few years ago with Mary Chambers, and Mary has been the head of public engagement at the Oxford University Clinical Research Unit in Vietnam for 20 odd years. And between us, we have facilitated a lot of the visual methods that were shown in the previous slide. So obviously we can't go into depth on any of those, but this is this is not an academic piece. It's a handbook. It's got lots of nice pictures in it, and hopefully it's a helpful guideline into how to do some of these more arts-based and visual methods. So to give a more detailed sense then of co-production and research, I'm going to give an overview of a case study of a current project, and it was one that Astrid mentioned at the beginning. And the title of the project that we're working on together with Chanel is the impact of extreme weather events on the mental health of vulnerable populations in Africa. And the short name of the project is WIMA. And the principal investigator is Colin Zawuji, and he is based at the Africa Health Research Institute in KwaZulu-Natal, and they are the lead institute. And the work is being done in Burkina Faso, Kenya, Mozambique, and South Africa. And the WIMA project is part of the SHIELD initiative, and the SHIELD initiative incorporates 3 different projects on the topic of climate change in Africa. So this project, and what I'm going to be talking about mainly is co-production with people who are really affected by the issue, and who are living under conditions where they're very severely impacted. So I'm in this part of the presentation, I'm going to be really focusing on working with affected community members. So the aims of WIMA are to make visible the direct impacts of extreme weather events on common mental disorders, so CMDs, depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. We're aiming to demonstrate the direct link between extreme weather event-related displacement and poor mental health amongst vulnerable populations, and to engage and involve affected community members as researchers in the project, to identify and advocate community-informed interventions and adaptation strategies, and to highlight the need for the implementation of community-derived interventions to promote good mental health and well-being amongst at-risk populations. So this is very much a transdisciplinary project, and the transdisciplines that are involved in WIMA are epidemiology, climate science, psychiatry, psychology, statistics, data science, and social science. So those are very much within the academy, within the academic sector. And then obviously there's community engagement, working with affected community members. We're working with social workers. We will be working with policymakers, civil society, and also with journalists in the media. And one of the important things about the WEMA study and the approach to the WEMA study is working with community engagement teams at the 4 research sites. So these are community liaison specialists, and they are the local facilitators of the community engagement and involvement activities. So the methods that are being used to generate evidence in the WEMA project are a literature review to understand the direct impact of extreme weather events on mental health in vulnerable populations. There's also a secondary data, an HDSS survey, household demographic surveillance survey, using data that's already been collected and analysing it to look at the impact of extreme weather events on mental health related mortality. There's also a prospective prevalence survey, which is investigating the current burden and impact of common mental disorders in vulnerable populations. And then there's digital storytelling. And this is where we're working with the affected community members to illustrate and narrate their personal lived experiences of the impacts of extreme weather on their mental health. And what we're particularly working with in WEMA is flooding and the impacts of flooding on people's lives and homes and families and communities. So engaging and involving community members as co-researchers, as community-based co-researchers. So we're working with 10 community-based co-researchers per site from particular locations in these 4 contexts in Africa. And the way that the community-based co-researchers have been brought into the project, the way that they have been recruited, is through project information meetings held according to the way that such meetings are held in these 4 very different African contexts. And how exactly those project information meetings are held is the decisions around that are made by the local teams, the community engagement teams in those settings. So they invite a wider community audience to come and hear about the project, and then ask for an expression of interest to be submitted. So it's not. So the people that are the co-researchers in the project are not co-opted in, which is often one of the big criticisms of this kind of work. They've come to a project information meeting, they've heard about the project, and they've heard about the role of the community-based co-researchers, which is a very substantive role, and then they have submitted an expression of interest to say, why they want to be involved in the project. And then those expressions of interests are then reviewed by the community engagement teams, and they have selected the 10 community members. So there are inclusion criteria. They're obviously looking for a gender balance, a wide age range, adults, so we go from 18 up into the late 60s, and a preferred ability to read and write. And then the picture is just the community-based co-researchers who are in Kenya, who are from an informal settlement called Makuru kwa Ruben in Nairobi. So one of the challenges then is the small number of people that are representing representing their community, representing the experience that's being explored, and I think that. The expression of interest, asking people to submit an interest in being involved in the project, is perhaps one way of overcoming the kind of like that selection bias, where you're explaining to people what's involved, and they are saying, okay, please can you consider me. So engaging and involving community members as co-researchers through the WEMA project then has There's a different phases, different activities happening throughout the project. So this is really where the co-production of knowledge is happening in these four different countries. And don't worry if you can't read the small print, because I am going to go through, just really outline what each of these stages is involving. But I think what I just want you to take away from this slide is that there are a lot of different activities that are happening throughout the lifetime of the project, which is directly involving the community-based co-researchers. So digital storytelling, this is a participatory narrative and arts-based approach for affected community members to convey their personal lived experiences of the impacts of exposure to extreme weather on their mental health. And so this is part of the evidence generation process, and it's, the evidence is all being generated by the community-based co-researchers with facilitation support, and you can see Astrid here in her absolute element. Supporting art making in the digital storytelling. So this is the evidence generation and the understanding, or the showing of lived experience, the sharing of lived experience. Then there's the participatory story analysis. So here, this is an in-depth, qualitative, participatory analysis of the stories. And this is being used to generate codes and identify key themes within the story narratives and images. And so we are working to develop these frameworks so that the people who have made these stories, the people that have created these stories, are also the people that analyze them. And they are the people that say, well, this is what I want you to see in my story. This is what I want you to understand in my story. And that this is all captured through a methodology which is very streamlined and scientific across the four sites. And then we'll move into the knowledge exchange process. And this is going to be an exchange of findings between the community participants and the project scientists to map out new insights that have been gained through the transdisciplinary data set. So we'll have the literature review, the HDSS, and the prevalence survey. So that data that's come very much from the academy and from academic research will be integrated with the findings from the stories. And it won't just be a case of showing the stories, it will be a case of showing the stories and the analysis of the stories. And so the community-based co-researchers will be very much in the room around the table with the project scientists, showing their evidence and showing their analysis and showing their meaning making from their experiences. Then there will be brainstorming, and the purpose of the brainstorming is to co-devise potential interventions. So the whole point of WEMA is to formulate potential interventions to strengthen mental health amongst the affected population, the vulnerable population, and so that requires, again, sitting around the table, and this time, as well as the community-based co-researchers and the project scientists, this will now also bring in local policymakers and civil society representatives. And then co-design. So after the brainstorming, you've got the interventions, the potential possible interventions have been conveyed, have been propounded, and then it's like, well, how are we going to actually exhibit this work? We've got all these different types of data. We've got, we've now got to engage multiple different audiences. We've got to engage fellow community members. We've got to engage policy. We've got to engage civil society. So how are we actually going to wrap all of this up, and how are we going to showcase this? And who's going to present it? who's going to be the person who actually showcases this work and stands up and represents the project. And then there's engagement training for the local teams. So I think in looking back to experience of other previous projects that have followed a co-production approach that I've been involved in, something that's often missed out is the readiness and the preparation to stand up and present your work. So we're talking about people who have been very disadvantaged, who haven't had educational opportunities, or have had very limited educational opportunities, who are not used to being heard and listened to, and who don't get an opportunity for public speaking, and especially not to kind of like policymakers and researchers, and perhaps even community leaders. So this part of the process in WEMA it can't be underestimated, is that getting people ready to take the stage so that they can present their knowledge with conviction and with confidence. So we're going to go and help with training the community engagement teams and the CBCRs and making all those decisions about, what will be shown, who's going to stand up, what are they going to say when it comes to the big day and they're in front of their audience. And it's they'll have a very small moment in time in which to make a big impact with their work. And then there'll be the stakeholder engagements, which is the delivery of the messages to an invited audience of, as I said, government officials, leaders, civil society, community, researchers, and advocacy groups. So one of the really exciting things about WEMA is that as well as undertaking the research process, it's also developing capacity in methods for transdisciplinary research at the four African sites. And so Astrid and I have created training materials in good participatory facilitation practice. We've delivered that training online, and we've also done in-person training so far in Kenya and here in South Africa in KwaZulu-Natal on digital storytelling. So that's been training prior to the storytelling process and then training in practice as part of the storytelling process. And then we're working, and Chanel's very involved with working to develop the methodological and participatory frameworks for the other parts of the project. And we're also working, so this is very collaborative, we're working with the local community engagement teams at the sites to develop these methodologies and to develop these analytical frameworks, because each of these processes, the participatory analysis of the stories, the knowledge exchange, the brainstorming, and the co-design, they will all generate data, and that data needs to be collected again in a very streamlined, systematic way, so that at the end of the day we can put everything together and make sense of it as findings of a co-produced process. Okay, so considerations of co-production then. Obviously, context is crucial, and wherever you're working. So, talking globally, talking nationally, talking locally, or on the continent. You're going to have very, very different belief systems. You're going to have very, very different cultural practices. Language is a big one. So we're going to be going out to Burkina Faso and working with affected community members who speak Douala only. And so we need to figure out how are we going to facilitate digital storytelling with people who are living in very, very rural farms and speak a very, very local language. So those are real those are real challenges, and we have to work to overcome them. I think representation is a really key one, and I don't like skipping over this because it's so important. But like, who's in the room and how did they get there? And this, because those are the people that are kind of like producing the knowledge and coming up with the interventions, and it's their own personal perspectives that are being fed into that machine. So the issue of representation is really, really key, and something that needs to be considered so carefully. And so, coming back to that kind of process of asking the community-based co-researchers to submit an expression of interest to be in the project was one way that we kind of approached the issue of representation in the WEMA project. Obviously, ethical considerations are massive. It was raised in previous lectures, both by Lynn and by Marina, around how much damage can be done working in very highly threatened, very at-risk communities with affected community members, bringing them into these processes, asking them to share their stories and really personal experiences, very hard, very emotional personal experiences, and then to go through this whole process. And if those relationships have to be managed so carefully, or have to be approached and worked with so carefully, because you can really damage trust in science, and you can break hope. I mean, you can do so much harm if you're not constantly thinking ethics as you're running these processes. And bring an engagement team in to support. Not obviously as a busy scientist, for example, you might be working on the biomarkers of tuberculosis. You might be trying to, develop new diagnostic tests. You can't be expected to also be, a community engagement expert who's able to go into the communities and mobilize and run visual methods processes, or have a community dialogue. So bringing engagement support into your team is just becoming more and more necessary and needed. And then the challenges. Well, so this is where I really want to open it up for discussion, because I certainly don't have the answers to this. But I just want to bring us back to this quote from the earlier paper from Grindel and colleagues. So, working in partnership with knowledge users to identify a problem and produce knowledge sharing, power and responsibility from the start to the end of research. So we're expected to enable equal and equitable partnership, to balance power and facilitate power dynamics, to translate scientific findings in ways that are accessible to transdisciplinary partners, integrate knowledge into a cohesive action plan, and then allocate, act on, and monitor responsiveness and responsibility. So, I'd like to really just at this point with the challenges, open it up for discussion, open it up for you to share your experience on any of these points. I am particularly flummoxed by this from the start to the end and before the start. So in proposal writing, I mean, I'm very, very interested to hear about how other researchers have actually meaningfully involved other people, not necessarily just affected community members, but knowledge users, in really meaningfully in a proposal writing process, when we're all under so much pressure to get these funding applications out so quickly often. Maybe with just a couple of weeks' notice, oh gosh, there's this call, I must go for it. So I'm really keen to hear from you. Any experience, any of your questions, comments? Yes.
How did you go about representation of your specific, of the community members. How did you handle that in this specific study? Just an example, were they also, the community members, were they also involved in the intervention?
Be working with people who had a lived, who were exposed to extreme weather events, and so the sites were chosen in advance. So that was something that was done, amongst the what do we call co-investigators, the co-investigating group. So the countries and the specific sites were already chosen. And then bringing in the community-based co-researchers, that was done through these project information meetings, where a wide community audience was invited. How exactly that process was done and who was in the room was left entirely up to the community engagement teams at the sites. Because obviously they have their own ways of doing of holding these kind of information meetings in their own contexts. They know how to mobilise people, how to bring people in, and then there was the expression of interest that was completed, and then there was the review of that expression of interest with a mind to making sure that there was this balance of gender, that there was a good age range as well, and that people were going to be available for the project, because this is now 2 years of involvement going through all these different stages. Are people going to be available for that length of time? So yeah. And the second question. So they will be very much. So where we're up to now in WEMA, so it's a live project, so we're going to be very excited to share the findings with you in future seminars. But they will be very involved. So all those different stages that I showed, the participatory analysis of the stories, the knowledge exchange, the brainstorming, all of those are working towards formulating potential interventions that are community informed, and that are practical and appropriate in those settings, and that are acceptable and usable by the people that are most affected. So yes, they will look, those groups of community-based co-researchers, and there's 10 in each setting, so there's 40 altogether, will be absolutely involved in developing and saying what those interventions should be. But so far we've done 2 digital storytelling processes, so we've got a long way to go. But I think I think it's quite groundbreaking work in terms of the really having all these different methodological frameworks that we need to devise and publish, hopefully, so that others can use them.
Hi, Jill, my name is Gabriela. My question is in relation to your comment on challenges. And I think the one hat I wore previously working as a social behavioral scientist in clinical trials, I think participatory researchers need to learn something from the RCT community engagers, because they are not an add-on to the discussion. They're part of the development of the protocol. And I think that is one thing in terms of when you do get a call out, put your community liaison officer on as a consortium partner. Don't put them as the ad hoc. And I think a lot of participatory researchers are not learning from the RCT environment where the community liaison officer is already involved. They are in the beginning. So as social behavioral scientists in the RCT space, we often had the community liaison officer right with us. And I think that could in part address one of the challenges, because in the social behavioral scientists outside of that space, many people are just seeing them as reference group. And that makes it very difficult then when it comes to the writing, because you're not writing with them. You're not creating a language where the community liaison officer is actually part and parcel a colleague and not just an MOU.
I'm involved in a project in London to improve access to healthcare for some members of the Somali community. And I think what was interesting with that was that we did the co-production work at the beginning as 2 small funded research projects. And then on the back of that, we then applied for bigger multi-stage research funding. So I think that the difficulty with that is that it's taken years. I mean, we're 5 years into the project and yeah.
And did it help?
I think it definitely helped in getting the larger grant funding, and it also helped with the ethics. And then I think also just from what Gabriella said, one of our research assistants that we appointed in a position was from the Somali community and was a representative of the community. So in that way, he then became part of the formal writing up and the publications that came out of the project.
So the last 2 questions, my name's Olivia Machabane and I'm in the Department of Psychiatry. We currently are in the process of, we sort of got feedback from a funder with regards to involving people with lived experiences in our project. And I think one of the things that they asked was around this particular question as to why are they involved in some sections of the project, but not all sections of the project. And I think what we're currently, in the process of providing feedback, but one thing that's sort of come to my mind, and it relates to the first point on the board about enabling equal and equitable partnerships, is to the equity in that process for someone with a lived experience of a mental health condition. How have you approached that in terms of whether it's compensation, whether it's involving them as a research assistant in the study, whether it's through publication? I'm very curious as to how you've approached that, because I think for researchers and collaborators, it's pretty clear. But I'm very interested in hearing other experiences of people with lived experience and how you ensure that when they take out their time and invest in the project, that they actually fairly kind of acknowledged and compensated for that. Thank you.
So in the WEMA project, the community-based co-researchers are being compensated for the time that they're putting into the project, and that was budgeted for as a non-negotiable budget line. When the grant was written and went in. I think it's in terms of involving community-based co-researchers as authors on papers, it definitely can be done. And perhaps one of the best ways to do that is through a conversation rather than expecting, sending them an email with a draft and saying, okay, I want your comments by next week, Friday. It's what I've recently done something similar where on the Water and Fire project, which I won't go into detail, but it was looking at disaster risk management in the context of water shortage and fire and flooding. And what we've done is we've written a book chapter with some of the community-based co-researchers, and there are authors on the chapter, and we had conversations with them, and so it was very much a dialogic piece that was shared over WhatsApp and over telephone calls to make sure that they were happy with the final product.
I wonder also about, maybe finding out from co-researchers what equity means to them. Because sometimes our versions or definitions of what equity is not necessarily what is important to them. And the main question is, how do we share equal power in this relationship? Like, what are we getting out of it? And how much does my voice count? And so, no amount of money can give people power if the end game doesn't benefit them. That's like paying them for their brain for the moment. So I really think it's important to have the conversations around equity. What's important to them? What do they want out of it? How are they going to feel like equal partners? And then it forces you almost to involve people from the beginning. And I think the push for lived experience is also about people saying, like, this is actually what goes on in a real life. This is what's happening in my real life. And do your research priorities align with lived experience? But I think it's a very tricky thing to do. So the strategies that Gill's proposing are really good. And I think depending on your context, you can take some things out of the toolbox as you need them.
Frameworks that we follow as researchers and practitioners when we're doing this work is largely based on literature. I would love to understand, what community-based co-researchers or affected community members that you're working with, how they see ethics, what they think of ethics, and what they think is ethical practice, because I think it could be expanded and look, not completely different, but have a different lens if we bring their perspectives into what do we mean by ethical research and ethics per se. So it's just after 12, and so this was just to say that. There's a need for a robust evaluation to identify whether co-approaches actually result in the ultimate goal of health research, applied health research, which is to improve health outcomes. So just in conclusion then, so co-production in health research continues to make great strides. We're living in very exciting times. The value of working in transdisciplinary teams, it's increasingly recognised and increasingly rewarded. We need to keep working hard to wrestle and overcome the obstacles that are put in our way by others, and also our own mindsets around doing this kind of work. And I think what's really important is that we stay critical, that we keep evaluating our work. Where are the small wins that happen as we're doing this, and where are we learning lessons all the time about what doesn't work as well, and to keep on sharing our learning. So I'm just going to put this course up. It's an Introduction and Practical Guide to Community Engagement and Involvement in Global Health Research, which is available, again, open access on the Global Health Network, and that has 7 modules in it that go through from the beginning to end of how to engage and involve communities in global health. Thank you. I'm done.